And I'm thrilled this evening to welcome to the Japan Society Dr. Sonia Favi, a Sklodowska-Curie Fellow at the John Rylands Research Institute at Manchester University. Sonia has much experience of digitisation projects, having worked on the Marega collection at the Bibliotheca Don Bosco in Rome, comprising thousands of woodblock prints as well as Japanese books, and has worked closely on that project as well as on the University of Manchester's Japanese maps collection with the Art Research Centre of Ritsumeikan University. Digitisation projects such as these open up so many resources to the interested general public as well as academic researchers, and have seen great advances in recent years, and in this time of reduced travel must have really come into their own. Sonia is author of Self Through Other: Production, Circulation and Reception in Italy of 16th century printed sources on Japan, which was published in 2018. But this evening, she'll share with us the fabulous Japanese maps collection at the University of Manchester, which she has been working on as part of a project on travel in Tokugawa, Japan. Let me just welcome again, Sonia, and hand straight over to you.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay. So good evening or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks again to the Japan Society for inviting me to give this lecture. So the aim of my talk today is to present both the collection, the Japanese maps collection in the University of Manchester Library, giving you an overview of the typologies of cartographic and topographic materials held there, and to present the research and digitization project that I have been involved in for the past year, discussing the digitization of the objects, the creation of the metadata, and the way you can use, in which you can use the Manchester Digital Collections or MDC. So the Japanese maps collection includes roughly 60 items and actually draws from two different collections in the University of Manchester Library. A few items come from the map collection, and the vast majority of them comes from the Japanese collection. And the two groups of objects are pretty different in nature. One could even say that the Japanese maps collection has two different souls. As for the map collection itself is an extensive cartographic repository, actually the largest in the north of England. And while it mostly focuses on topographic and thematic mapping for the UK, it also offers wide-ranging coverage for the rest of the world. And this includes 5 antiquarian maps related to Japan, 4 of which are British and 1 of which is Japanese but written in English. And the British maps are interesting because they offer a sort of compact summary of the history of the cartography of Japan between the 18th and the 19th century. The earliest of the 4 was published in London in 1794, and as typical of many maps of Japan published in Europe in the 18th century, it's based on a collation of geographical information about the country that had reached Europe at different stages in the previous centuries. It's partly based on information collected by Portuguese missionaries in the 16th century, which had been filtered in Europe mainly through this still not very accurate map titled Iaponiae Insulae Descriptio, which had been composed around 1592 by the Portuguese Jesuit father Luis Teixeira, who at the time was working as a mathematician and cartographer for the King of Spain. And then in the map from the Manchester collection, information drawn from this kind of Jesuit source is complemented with data collected by later sources, and particularly by the German physician Engelbert Kampfer, who had lived in Japan as an employee of the Dutch East India Company between 1690 and 1692. Kampfer wrote a history of Japan that was a hit in Britain, It was published for the first time in London in 1727 and was so popular that 12 subsequent editions saw the light in the following 10 years. And in his History of Japan, he reproduced a map of the country divided into its 66 provinces, which was based on a Japanese source, a map by the artist Ishikawa Tomonobu or Ryusen. We have a copy of that at the Rylands Library, and I will get back to that later. And this rendition of Ishikawa's work was reproduced and adopted in Europe many times, as late as the 19th century. And this map is a pretty good example of the combination of these different kinds of sources. Then the second map from the collection was instead published in London in 1880, and it is representative of a later evolution in the European cartography of Japan, when older sources, such as Ishikawa's map, lost relevance with the arrival of Japanese maps based on updated surveying techniques. We'll see some of them later, and therefore more accurate. And later on also with the arrival of data collected directly by European and American travelers, especially after Japan was forced to open its borders in the 1850s. This map combines both kinds of sources, that is, later Japanese maps, and in this case, information collected by a German geographer who spent several months of 1874 in Japan, residing in the German legation of Tokyo. The last two maps are similar in style, but they are thematic maps, war maps, representing Korean Japan and Korea, Japan and China, and published at the end of the 19th century in the occasion of the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and 1895. And this coverage of the event is not surprising, as the war had a significant impact on British policies in East Asia, and Japan's success in the war cemented the idea that Japan could be a worthy partner for Britain in the region. And then the last map from the map collection is a reflection of the influence of European cartography on Japanese cartography at the end of the 19th century. It's the first edition of a tourist map, or as the title says, Map of Japan for Tourists, published by an institution called the Kihinkai, or Welcome Society of Japan, in 1897. It was printed for English-speaking tourists and was inspired by British tourist maps, giving relevance above all to new steamship and railway routes. And it's a pretty interesting item because the Welcome Society that created it worked as one of the very first national tourist offices in the world. It was created as a non-profit organization for the promotion of inbound tourism, mainly addressed to tourists from Europe and North America, and it was meant to both attract foreign currency and use tourism as a way to improve Japan's international reputation. So these are the maps from the map collection. They are all written in English, and with the exception of one map from the late 18th century, they are all from the end of the 19th century. On the other hand, if one looks at the maps from the Japanese collection, the picture is pretty different. All the items are in Japanese or are produced in Japan, and all are dated from the Edo or Tokugawa period. The Japanese collection is not just maps. It's actually pretty heterogeneous and includes roughly 230 titles between manuscript and printed works. But maps and topographic materials are one of its more remarkable features, as they account for roughly 1/4 of the items. The Japanese collection as a whole was assembled in the 1860s and 1870s by the 25th Earl of Crawford from the collections of a number of prominent Japanologists. And once assembled, it was purchased in 1901 by Enriqueta Rylands, who was the founder of the John Rylands Library, which is now part of the University of Manchester Library. And if you want to know more about the history and background of the collection, I recommend this article by Professor Peter Kornicki, which is now available in the library digital collections at this link, as it includes a detailed history of the collection and also the first detailed catalog that was ever made for the collection, which has actually been the only one up until very recently. So this is as for the maps specifically, this is a rough list of the typologies that you can find in the collection. A good number of city maps, a few local maps, and particularly maps of sacred areas, road maps, provincial maps, and atlases of the Japanese provinces, regional maps, maps of Japan, and world maps. The majority of them are printed, but there's also a number of manuscripts. And I think this list gives you an idea of the internal variety of the collection, which makes it a very good mirror to the so-called mapped society of Edo Japan. This definition, mapped society, has been used by Sugimoto Fumiko, referring to Edo Japan as a context that has left us with a distinct diversity of maps, each one made with particular goals in mind. As you can see, many different kinds of maps with many different uses and aims. Maps had already been produced in Japan before the Edo period, but it was in the Edo period that a proper cartographic culture first took root in Japan. The ruling Tokugawa family and other local Japanese authorities systematically ordered the land surveys in order to facilitate territorial control, which resulted in administrative maps, and at the same time a growing publishing industry generated commercial maps, some based on these official models, other based on previously published maps or manuscript maps, and other created specifically for distribution to the public. And the market for them and for topography in general was wide, in relation to a number of factors such as the availability of relatively cheap, strong and light paper, the availability of new pigments, which allowed for the use of color in iconography, the existence of a network for the circulation of these materials within the country, and the general good levels of literacy, which contributed to the development for the first time in Japanese history of a sort of shared geographical and social lexicon between people belonging to different local cultures and social classes. It is what Mary Berry has defined as the birth of a library of public information. I don't have time to present all of the items in the collection today, but I'd still like to show you some of the highlights. For example, as I mentioned, the collection has a good number of city maps, which range from the beginning of the 18th century to the end of the Edo period and cover 5 main cities. City maps were pretty common in the Edo period, as this phase of Japanese history was marked by the development of a vibrant urban culture, and they tended to be very ephemeral, constantly updated, as a reflection of a demand for up-to-date information about a constantly changing environment, meaning not only the spatial organization of the city, but also its cultural life. And I think, for example, Edo maps from the collection are a good mirror to that. For example, this Edo map from the end of the 18th century, which in the colophon promotes itself as largely revised every month, focuses on 2 main aspects of life in Edo. The first is warrior houses, which were an object of curiosity for commoners in the city, also because the authorities generally banned discourse about them. And there's a legend in this part of the map that lists the warrior houses in the city, and then the warriors' houses are represented here, as was very typical with the family crests associated with them. The other focus of the map is recreation within the city, with a highlight on typical tourist spots, such as temples and shrines, which are enlarged and pictorially represented, and a list of the distances to them from the city center in Nihonbashi. And then we have this other map later from the mid-19th century, which has similar characteristics but is richer in color and includes as a focus a list of Edo Nenchu Gyoji, that is the annual festivals taking place within the city. And then dated around the same time, we have a detailed series of sectional maps, those that were called Kiriezu, roughly 30 maps published by Owari Yaseishi between 1849 and 1862. This series presents an altogether different perspective on Edo, as it transforms it in a city without a center, where every area from Nihonbashi to Asakusa is represented with equal detail and with an equal treatment of the landscape. So a rich collection of city maps like this one offers a glimpse on the many ways in which a same city could be represented, catering to different audiences and responding to changes in the geographical structure and the social composition of the city. As for maps of sacred areas, we have several ones, for example, of Fuji and Nikko. This one is a very nice example from the mid-19th century, titled Fuji-san Shinke Zenzu, a complete map of the true shape of Mount Fuji, which was a late variation of a genre known as Sanke Mandala or pilgrimage mandala, which were large-scale representations of sacred areas. The map focuses on the religious nature of the mountain, which is why it gives a central position to these two figures here, Kakugyoto Butsu and Jikiyo Miroku, who are both associated with the Fujiko or Fuji confraternities that organized pilgrimages to the mountain from Edo. And earlier Sanke Mandala tended to be very symbolic in nature, but in later examples like this one, as you can see, there was a more pointed attention to realism in the representation of the experience of pilgrimage on the mountain. This was because the map was commissioned by the ritual performers of Fujiyoshida Sengen Shrine here on the northern side of Fuji to be used in performances meant to attract pilgrims to the mountain, and also presumably was sold on the mountain as a souvenir. The triangular section here could be folded and the map could be assembled into a portable three-dimensional reproduction of Fuji to be kept in the house. Another interesting item from the collection is a volume of this map created in 1690 by the cartographer and surveyor Ochiko Chidoin and the painter Hishikawa Moronobu, which is a woodblock printed hand-colored dochuzu or on-the-road map. And the image you see is only a detail, as the map is roughly 36 meters long, folded between covers in 5 volumes and reproduces in scale the whole length of the well-known and loved Tokaido Highway. This map was based on an administrative map, but it was itself probably meant to be looked at as a tool for virtual travel rather than for practical purposes. And this is why it is highly pictorial and focuses so heavily on life on the road. As for provincial and regional maps in the collection, they include both manuscripts and printed maps and a variety of formats. They range from pictorial and colorful printed commercial maps, like this one representing the Shinano province, to manuscript ones highlighting routes, like this one, which represents Chugoku and Shikoku. This is only a detail because this is a huge map. There are also commercial thematic maps, like this one, which is centered on Mount Fuji. It is titled Fujimi Jusanshu Yochizenzu, which literally means map of the 13 provinces from which Mount Fuji is visible. And it represents a region, the region that corresponds to the Kanto region today, and it's actually a collation of different provincial maps. The collection also includes provincial atlases like this one, which was one of those maps that I mentioned earlier, based on later surveys, accurate surveys of the country. And this shows major routes across Japan and the major points of interest within each single province. Another highlight of the collection are commercial maps of Japan, a genre that became popular from the mid-17th century and contributed to turning Japan into a more familiar notion, even for those sections of the public who never traveled far from their city or village. The collection holds some of the most well-known and reproduced examples of maps of Japan, and it shows how while commercial maps of Japan tended to conform to some elements of a standard iconography, usually derived from administrative maps, for example, they tended to give prominence to provinces, they tended at the same time to be very different from one another, reflecting the different backgrounds and interests of their creators and their different responses to market demands. This map, for example, is the one I mentioned before by Ishikawa Tomonobu or Ryusen, which inspired many European maps. And the author was Chonin, a urban dweller who mostly worked for a public of urban dwellers, for literate commoners. And he wasn't particularly interested in cartographical accuracy. He ignored recent surveys and mostly based this map on a collation of information from previously published maps, but he did choose to include up-to-date information about the political geography of Japan. He did divide Japan in provinces, but he also listed the name of local lords and the estimated productivity of their domains, which catered to the public's curiosity toward border houses and also provided a more realistic vision of the political structure of the country, as provincial divisions were actually an outdated administrative system. He also included distances within Japan and distances from Japan to foreign countries, which are in some cases represented at the edges of the maps, as in the case of Korea here. And again, this catered to the public because foreign lands were usually absent from early Tokugawa administrative maps, reflecting their foreign policy, which tended to isolation. This map was very popular. It was only displaced in terms of popularity in Japan with maps published at the end of the 18th century by the Confucian scholar Nagakubo Sekisui, who was the first to use a grid of latitude and longitude and a fixed scale to represent Japan, like in the example you see, which is only one of the many variations of his maps included in the Japanese maps collection. Nagakubo was involved in Western studies. He was interested in European standards of cartography and worked to put Japan in relation with the wider world. And this same interest in putting Japan in context is reflected in word maps, such as the one here produced by the cartographer Mitsukuri Shogo, which shows the world divided into two hemispheres and is based on a series of earlier maps, including a French chart from 1835. Again, this includes information about latitude and longitude, and this map is particularly remarkable for its attention to borders and power relations between states. It highlights the relationship, for example, between non-independent states and the states that controlled them. And this reflects a growing preoccupation about foreign relations at a time when Japan was about to be projected on the stage of global diplomacy with the signing of commercial treaties. So this is just a sample of the maps in the collection. And aside from maps, there's also a range of other topographic materials, such as encyclopedic works with sections on topography, topographical studies of different kind, travel guidebooks, and particularly Meisho Zue, which were large multi-volume illustrated guidebooks, and some landscape prints. For example, this one is a bird's eye view representation of Edo, which is representative of the genre that became very common in the 19th century as a sort of complement to city maps. I know this was quick, but this should give you a very general idea of the contents of the maps collection, the Japanese maps collection. And now I would like to move on to discussing how the idea came up of making this variety of cartographic and topographic materials more widely available in digital form. So a first digitization project was launched in 2016, sorry, by led by Dr. Erika Baffelli and funded by the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation and the Japan Foundation. The collection at this point was only partially digitized, and the images were put with basic metadata in the library digitized collections hosted on the platform called Luna, which was the main digital repository for the University of Manchester special collections at the time. I'll try to show you how the maps would appear in Luna. I hope you can see. As you can see, you could navigate the maps and you could also download them in different formats. And then you could navigate, even if not while looking at the maps, the metadata in this side, this part of the page. And the metadata included the identifiers of the item, a transliterated title, some basic information about publications, such as the date of creation, and the place of creation, dimensions of the open object, a list of subjects, physical information such as the support, and as you can see, an item, a short item description over here. And at around the same time when the collection went live on Luna, I learned, thanks to Erika Baffelli actually, about the collection itself, and I applied for a pilot grant at the John Rylands Research Institute within the library. And I was able to spend a few weeks, thanks to that grant, in the library, which allowed me to draft a grant proposal and to obtain funding for the Marie Curie project I am currently working on as a PI. And it is as part of this project that I have been collaborating with the imaging team at the library and with the curator for the Japanese collection, Julian Simpson, in order to create a complete online Japanese maps collection. And we planned to create it in Manchester Digital Collections, or MDC, which was launched in January 2020 in collaboration with Cambridge Digital Library, and is the most recent digital repository for research-specific special collections at the library. It is meant to be a metadata-rich, high-resolution image repository specific for research collections, and we'll see why. And just to show you, this is the landing page of the collection, and you can see recent collections, trending items. We are trending now, apparently. And you can browse all the collection from here, or search within the collection with the simple search and advanced search function. And so when we agreed to use MDC, first of all, I agreed with the imaging team and with Julian, the curator, on a list of items to digitize that would be relevant for a Japanese maps collection. And I sent them a spreadsheet with the identifiers of the item and the priority list and other annotations. And once they approved the list, while they were digitizing the new objects, I helped in the migration of the items that were already in Luna into MDC, and specifically I edited and expanded the metadata. The items that were already on Luna were launched as part of this new Japanese maps collection on March 5th, 2021. And right now, the imaging team has almost completed the digitization of the new items, and I am working on their metadata. And we plan to go live with all the remaining items by the end of August, which is also the end of my project. We decided to proceed in batches, in groups, rather than uploading all the items at the same time, mainly because of COVID-related reasons, because the project had to be first postponed and then broken down in different phases due to the library closures, which meant that I had no access to the archives and that the imaging team couldn't access the photographic studio. And even after reopening, social distancing meant that my access to the archive was limited, and that as a general rule, only one person could be working in the studio each day instead of 3. For this project specifically, 2 photographers have been allowed in the room sometimes, because the size and fragility of the items can make them very difficult to work with if one is alone, but social distancing has made working together much more challenging. So we decided to put online everything that we had ready, and then progressively add materials to the collection. And now things are progressing well, and we do hope to finish by August. As for the digitization, as I mentioned, it was completed internally in the library photographic studio and by the library's imaging team. Actually, photographing collections has really been part of the mission of the library almost since its foundation, as stated in this extract from a minute book on the establishment of the photographic studio, which is from over 100 years ago. Of course, the equipment used today is fairly different from that time, and specifically, the basic equipment that the imaging team used for the Japanese maps collection is this one. Phase 1, IQ4XF digital camera system with a 80mm Schneider lens, which provides great photographic detail and information, and with the correct lighting can show characteristics of the item, such as pigment damaging that aren't even visible to the naked eye. This camera is attached to a wall-mounted Kaiser copy stand, and the shooting is tethered to a Mac Pro, where the team uses a software called Capture One to quality check each image on screen, making any adjustment and reshooting if necessary before moving on. As for the environment for shooting, the imaging team uses Pro Photo Studio lighting, using umbrellas to create a large pool of even lighting. The Japanese maps specifically also required a bespoke base made from conservation foam and conservation card, and these had to be built because many of them are so large that they could only be placed on the floor of the studio to be photographed. And this is also the reason why maps are usually photographed in more than one shot and then digitally stitched back together. This can be one of the most challenging parts of the process, but the software has improved in recent years, and sometimes this can be partially automated, and the final result tends to look really good. These are some pictures of the studio, the camera, the computer, and the umbrellas, as you can see. The imaging team has been experimenting several advanced photographing techniques in the past years, also taking advantage of the advancements in automation. And if you are interested in knowing more about the research in imaging techniques that is being conducted at the library, I'd advise this YouTube video here, that introduces their work in far more technical detail that I am able to provide. So these were the basis of the digitization process, but what about the metadata? As I mentioned, MDC is meant to be metadata rich. It is meant as a tool to facilitate academics in bringing their research on the collections to a wider audience, and to work as a platform for them to describe and contextualize the items, and when applicable, to digitally transcribe them and create digital editions. With the Japanese collection, we didn't opt for the creation of digital editions, as most of the items only present limited amounts of text in combination with visual elements. But what we did choose was to combine the metadata with a very detailed description, object description. And I'll try to show you how the metadata work for the item. In this case too, we have the unique identifiers of the item, the physical location and the class mark, and then the title section. The title section posed the first problem we had while working with the MDC, because one thing that we wanted to add with respect to Luna was the characters for the Japanese characters for the title and a translation. But we discovered a bias in the development of MDC while working on the Japanese collection, which is the fact that it only allows to choose one title as the main and the rest as subordinate. So we did go as in Luna with the transliterated title, and then put the characters and the translation as alternative titles. The problem with this is that it can create some confusion with actual alternative titles for the item, which were generally absent from Luna. If you are familiar with early modern Japanese published works, you will know that they tend to have more than one title. For example, in this case, you have the so-called Naidai, or internal title, that is the title that appears on the map, and then you have a different title on the envelope and the title on the daisen, which is the label here on the cover. And then you can have a preface title or a postface title. In the case of books, you can also have the so-called hashira dai or hashira title. The hashira is the section of the folio which folds, which usually also reports the page number. So we did want to include all those titles as well. The good thing about MDC is that you do have a detailed object description, so we specified where the title came from in the description, but this problem has been flagged for development, so we do hope to solve it in the future. And then you have a section with the subjects, which is was already also in Luna, but is one of the benefits of MDC is that we transform this section into a clickable link. And if you click on the link, you get taken to a search page with all the items that are related to the same subject within the collection. And then you have information about the publication with a summary here, which is taken, usually I took it from the colophon of the map. Over here, you see Edo, Hosendo, which was the name of the shop, and Maruya Tokudo, which was the name of the publisher. And then this information is broken down into publisher. Usually when we have more than one publisher, we only put one here, and then more than one in here. and then the place of publication. And again, this is a clickable link, so you can find all the maps within the collection that were published in the same place, and the date of publication. And we also added an associated persons section, which reported all the creators of the map as listed on the map itself. For example, in this case, we have two carvers, Asakura Tetsuro and Sugita Kinsuke, and we have here the name of the creator, which I reported here as Hashimoto Sadahide, and it appears on the map as Gyokuransai Hashimoto. In this case, I opted for a uniform name, which I took from the National Diet Library online authorities page, which was my main reference for uniform name and aliases, as well as the Kokubunke and the National Institute of Japanese Literature, Kotenseki Sogo Mokuroku. So whenever I had an alias on the map, I put the uniform name in the associated person section, and then again in the description I specified where the name was and what the original name was on the map. And then we have all the information that was also in Luna, including, however, also the folded dimensions of the map. And for with the fact that all these maps came from the previous digitization project, we also put appropriate credit for that in the metadata. We also added the bibliography section over here. In this case, you only have the previous catalog by Peter Kornicki. In other cases, I added all the books that I referenced while studying the object. And if you click on the link, you get taken either to the digitized source or to the corresponding WordCat page, if that is available. And let me go back to here. Yeah, and one thing, the item description, as I mentioned, is a combination of things. It is a guide and an integration to the metadata themselves. It is a description of the general characteristics of the item. It contextualizes the item. For example, for all the Edo maps I put in, I describe them in context of in the context of the larger productions of Edo maps of the period. And even if we didn't opt for a complete transcription of the text on the map, I did include a short description of the contents of any plate, preface, postface, legend, and so on included in the map, and reported in translation any information about the object that I found particularly relevant for its description. In terms of how MDC practically works for the creation of the metadata, MDC uses TEI, that is an acronym for Text Encoding Initiative. TEI is a kind of markup language that has been developed to describe the object and structure information about them, and it is mostly used for text-based objects, but it can also be used to describe visual materials, and Japanese maps are a little bit of both, as we've seen. It is based on XML and encodes information about text, meaning its structure, its appearance, and its content in a way that is understandable by a computer, but is also readable by a human. And this is an example of how it looks like. I did train in TEI at the library, but I did not develop the TEI for the maps because I am not an expert. It would have taken me too long to do that. So what we did is that I completed the metadata for the objects in a spreadsheet like this one, and then a person in charge, and you can see all the people in charge of an item in the TEI metadata itself. In this case, it was Bryony, extracted the information I created in the cells and converted it to TEI. It's readable by a human, but it's not easily readable. But fortunately, we had the occasion to look at the final results on a staging site before launching the live collection. I still find typos and mistakes to this day when I reread it, so please forgive my non-native speaker self whenever you browse the collection. On the metadata side, I should also mention that with these maps online, we have also been able to continue, though rather slowly, to add the descriptions of the physical objects also to the general online library catalog, because so far they weren't part of it. The only existing catalog was the one included in Professor Kornicki's article. However, we still don't have any navigation between MDC and the library catalog, so the descriptions of the physical and digital objects are not yet linked in any way. Lastly, I would like to give you an idea of how to navigate the main features of MDC. And let me show you here. So MDC is meant to allow enhanced viewing and manipulation of these ultra high quality images. It allows to display each map both in the sections it was photographed in. This is not the case. We only have the covers and the map, but when an image was digitally stitched, it shows both. Yeah, maybe I can show you this one. Both the section and the final item. It has a quick zoom function, so you can very easily navigate the image. And a thing that wasn't doable in Luna, you have a parallel display of text in the right panel here and display of the item. You can collapse this section here by clicking here, this part, and also enlarge the image with this button here. And you can either look at the metadata with the description, or choose to only look at the metadata or at the transcription when that is available. This section here is inapplicable to the maps, but it is applicable to any book because it offers a sort of digitized index of the item, so you can jump to different sections of the item, and then with the thumbnails you can move easily in between pages. And from here you can download the image in 3 different formats, and MDC uses this license, the Creative Commons license CC BY NC 4.0, which means you can download and use any item for any non-commercial purpose without asking for any additional permission. And if you do require permission, you can click on here and get to this request write page. You can also download the TEI metadata for the image by clicking here. They are public to access. And this button here means that the image is IIIF compliant. What is IIIF? IIIF is an acronym for International Image Interoperability Framework, And it means that you can display what is called the IIIF manifest, that is all the resources that make up the item, images, metadata, the description, into any IIIF compatible viewer. There are many web-based open access viewers, such as Mirador or Universal Viewer, and they allow you to annotate and compare items across platforms that are IIIF compliant. So you can compare items even from different university collections, provided that they are IIIF compliant. In the case of MDC, we use Mirador as a default viewer, so you just have to click here and it will take you to the Mirador display of the item, or you can right-click the IIIF logo here and copy the link, and then you can upload any image on a viewer, and they will appear a bit like this. These are from the Japanese maps collections, and these are from different collections. So basically, this is it. I should also probably mention that we have been using these items for public engagement at the library. We've been organizing several virtual visitor engagement events. The next one is on the 28th of May, so if you want to join, please do. And that an online exhibition connected to MDC is in the works on a platform called Omika, and hopefully it will be online by the end of August. So this MDC platform is a useful support not only for research and teaching, but also for public engagement. And thank you very much. Please do write to me if you have any questions. And here is the link to the collection.
Sonia, thank you very much indeed. Let me stop you sharing this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you. You certainly gave us a real insight into all that goes into the massive task of trying to digitize these collections, and the way of thinking how people might want to use them and need to engage with them in the future. It was really fascinating to get a glimpse into that. There's been a few questions in the chat already. Let me just pass on Chris Hood's question at the beginning. He noticed how the view of Japan and the shape of Japan changed very drastically from map to map. How did the public react to such changes? As that, is there any feedback as to how people thought?
I don't really know of any feedback, but what I can attest is that they were both very popular. So probably it wasn't something that people particularly cared about. Also because I think that there wasn't such an established notion of objectivity in map making in Edo or Tokugawa Japan. For example, Ishikawa Tomonobu or Yusen stated multiple times that he didn't care about that at all, and that he was even frustrated with the recent surveys done by the Tokugawa government, because they focused on accuracy, and he wasn't interested in that. I think in many cases maps were a way to travel virtually. So what mattered the most was that they were visually pleasing, colorful, and that they included information that the public wanted to know about, such as the background on warrior houses, information about foreign places, which was also included in encyclopedic work, such as Wakan Sansai Due, which is an encyclopedia that we have at the library. They are digitizing it now. It's massive. So kudos to the imaging studio for doing that. And but I don't think that was a major preoccupation.
So it was the detail rather than the look that was the important aspect.
Yeah, above all in the earlier Tokugawa period. Like later on, there was a major survey done at the end of the 18th century by Ino Tadataka, which was the basis for the creation of atlases such as the one that I showed you at the end of my presentation of the maps. And those maps were more inspired by an idea of objectivity, also because at the beginning of the 18th century, some of the surveying techniques by the Dutch people in Dejima had become common knowledge, while before they were kept in secret by the shogunate. But yeah, maybe later on it was a preoccupation, not early on, not really from what I gathered from my research.
Thank you very much. Very fascinating. And Takeshi Hajiro, I think you're unmuted now if you have a question.
Yeah, just out of my curiosity, I studied geography in London a long time ago, and the cartography was one of my favorite subjects. And that's why I'm listening into your very interesting talk. And thank you very much for that. And I wrote that listening to you, I was curious to learn that the Western nations was already acquiring so many the Japanese maps in the Edo period and before. And I was wondering why, because the exportation of maps were very strictly forbidden for the security reasons by the government at the time. And I was wondering how the Western nations acquired so many maps. But on the second thought, after posting the question, I thought that perhaps you are talking about all the collection which was acquired after the Edo period, and so that's why you have free access to those old maps. I asked just out of my curiosity. Thank you.
No, it's a legitimate question because some of those maps were actually smuggled outside of Japan. Not the geographic information collected by the Portuguese, because that was collected at the time when people were actually allowed to be in Japan, and there were also cartographic exchanges between the missionaries there and the Japanese people. But for example, the Ishikawa's map, the one copied by Camper, was smuggled outside of Japan, and also Sekisui's maps were too. So yeah, that's a legitimate question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Norio Suzuki, you also have a question, I believe.
Yes, Sonia, thank you very much. This is very impressive. And since it's such a technology, I wonder if you have a plan to, digitally archive other Japanese maps in UK. There should be a lot, from Edo period, many European countries, particularly England, UK, should have good relationship. So there should be lots of collection in UK.
Yeah, first of all, let me specify that I only have a very small part of the credit, because a big credit goes to the imaging studio of the Rylands Library. I wouldn't have been able to do that without them. I did receive training in digitization, but they did all the work from that part. And then we cooperated with Julian, the curator, and the rest of the staff at the library. So it was, I'm doing the kaudashi here, but it really was a cooperation with all the staff at the library. I've been part of several projects of this kind, so I would surely be glad to do other projects like that in the future. It really depends on where work takes me, because I'm on a temporary contract here. So yeah, we'll see how my presence in academia goes from now on. But yeah, surely, I've actually been contacted by the Società Geografica Italiana in Italy. They have some Tokugawa maps, and they wanted to discuss a collaboration. So I'm sure there will be other projects in the future.
Yeah, this is very rich collection, and I also like classic Japanese maps, but you showed a lot, which I hadn't seen before. So I thought it would be wonderful if we could have a chance to see other maps through this digital technology. It makes it easier, right, for anybody to search for any unseen maps in Europe.
Yeah. No, I think these projects in general. I worked with the Ritz-Meikan before, as Dr. Potter kindly mentioned. They've done a massive work of digitization in Europe, and I think it's really the future. And I think COVID made us more aware of that, but that was the direction that humanities were taking even before. I think digital humanities are a big a developing field now, and it will be really important to work on projects like this.
Great, thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
Lawrence Sandman has asked a question about whether you've done any imaging using other parts of the light spectrum, for example, using ultraviolet light and so on, whether it may not reveal anything, but would it be interesting to try that? And has it been done?
So the photographic studio at Rylands has done lots of experimenting. They use multispectral imaging, which is a technique that uses particular light setting. They have a function in their cameras which is called focus stacking, which means that several pictures are taken with different focuses of the same map, and then they are combined digitally with software to produce one image with precise and defined point of focus that is really useful for macro photography. They have used a technique called reflectance transformation imaging, in which basically an item directly below a camera is photographed several times as the light source moves. And this allows you to investigate the surface texture of the item. And they have been experimenting with different collections. In the case of the Japanese collection, one thing that one outcome of that experimentation is that sometimes you can really see things that you don't see with the naked eye, like pigment damaging on the maps. But if you have time, I recommend you have a look at the YouTube video I linked. Maybe I can link it in the chat. Let me find it again, because it includes lots of interesting information about the research that is being done. There you go. That is being done at the library with imaging.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia. And Mario is asking whether you could talk a little bit more about the Shinsei Yoshi Zenzu map of 1844. What was it for? What was the purpose?
So I wonder if I can show it to you to talk about it. Just give me just a second, and I'll try to share my screen again. There it is. Sorry. There you go. So this was a word map. And I'd say it was mainly done for research. Like, it was a way to put Japan in context with the wider world. And I call it a research map because it was not done from serving. Of course, Japan was still closed at the time, but it was based on a combination of different maps. Previous maps, and particularly you have let me show you. You have notes here that basically explain that a French chart from 1835 was used, and then in order to complement the information included in that chart, and above all because the image and the text were too small, other models were used and combined. And I think this is a map that is a reflection of the time, because in 1844, Japan was feeling the pressure of foreign countries to reopen its borders, and it was interested in Japan, people were interested in the power relations between states outside Japan. And as I mentioned, you have a detailed representation of the structure of power here in England, and the structure of power between suzerain states and their dependent state. It is highlighted in the map, and you have also borders highlighted on the map in this way. And there's also the interest here in geographical objectivity, because you have latitude, longitudes, you have climate zones indicated on the map. So yeah, it's a combination of research on power structure in the world and research on cartographic, European cartographic techniques, I'd say. And if you want here, if you have a look in the collection, you have a detailed description with basically a summary of the information I've just given you.
Well, that's quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorite, together with the Fuji map. Yeah. I remember when I first came here in 2016, and I opened the Fuji map, and I was like, no, I have to work on this collection in some way, because I was just amazed by
the 3D Fuji that came.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, we reproduce it. We tried so hard to reproduce the 3D form in the library, because we couldn't find the right kind of paper to do that. But yeah.
There was Fuji in 3D. Were there other 3D maps made of other areas of Japan that you know of, or is this just a one-off?
I don't know. I don't know of others. I would be curious, and it's a question that I ask the audience as well if they know about that. It's the only one I found personally.
That is interesting. Takeshi Shimizu was asking, whether you have any maps that were used by Isabella Bird or Victorian travelers who went to Japan. Do you know anything about where the maps came from and who used them and when they used them and so on?
So as for Isabella Bird, I don't think so. There is a map of Edo, but it's really it's a manuscript map. It's not online yet. It's in the new batch of items, and it's or maybe it is. Let me check. It might be, but yeah, it's a really sketchy map. So I don't think she used that one. Yeah, this one. I'll share it for you. Yeah, it's really. No, it's not Edo, actually. It's an island to the north of Edo. So yeah, I don't think it was used by her. And as for the uses of the maps, some of them are annotated. So I admit I didn't really look into that yet. Some of them are annotated, so you can sort of build a history of their use, and of course you can have a general idea of the audience, the intended audience for each map by how it is structured and who created it. But yeah, that's another field of research to look into. I will do that, I hope, before I leave the library.
I know the study of these maps I can clearly imagine can take you down in so many different directions.
Yeah.
And having once got these maps digitized, you've now opened the way for following researchers to take them, and they don't have to visit the collection, which of course these days they couldn't. I know that Sainsbury Institute in Norwich has some amazing map collection. They've got all of Hugh Kotatsu's collection as well as other.
Yeah, I've been there.
You have, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's quite, as somebody mentioned earlier, there are quite a lot of maps of Japan around in this country, in many different places. But do you know of any researchers who are working with maps, and what kind of research projects they're undertaking based on them, or is that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are many people working with maps. In 2016, when I came here first, an amazing collection of like an overview of Japanese cartography was published, which is the one that I mentioned earlier, Cartographic Japan, the one from which I quoted Sugimoto Fumiko. And I think they basically called, I hadn't yet started to work on maps at that point, but they called all the major experts in Japanese cartography at the time. So, and actually a volume is in the works now, so far as I know, about the Cortazzi collection in the Sainsbury Institute. So that should be out pretty soon. So yeah, I think it's a hot topic. Many people are interested in that.
Well, they're so beautiful apart from anything else.
Yeah.
But Sonia, thank you so much. That's been a really fascinating introduction to what seems to be a wonderful collection. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been lovely to have you.
Thank you.